Today's episode is presented by Lodestar, the fee experts.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Lending Leaders. My name is Alayna Gardner, AMP, and this week I'm joined by John Haring. He's the head of compliance at Wilqo. And you've been around the mortgage industry for a little bit, but can you tell me a little bit about how you got here?
Thanks for having me. Yeah,
Of course.
People see me these days and they see the beard and they see the gray hair, and they remember seeing me without either of those things when I first got into this almost 25 years ago, actually.
Just a minute.
Just a minute, a little bit.
That's a mortgage minute.
I, like so many of us out there in the mortgage industry, when I was a little kid and people asked me what I want to do when I grow up, I immediately said astronaut.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, but after that, it actually ended up being a compliance person.
Yeah, so. Astronaut to compliance. It's a really direct pipeline.
Absolutely. It's probably why we're all nerds. Anyway.
Yeah.
No. Ironically, in truthfulness, I was doing compliance in a completely different industry back in the late 90s, early aughts. I was doing compliance in the retail industry. A lot of people don't know that retail even has compliance. But I was working for someone whose parents owned a brokerage, both a real estate brokerage and a lending brokerage out of Washington State. And they convinced their daughter, her boss, or my boss, that she should start up a branch of their mortgage broker operation in Dallas, Texas. And within a month or two of her agreeing to go do that, my phone started ringing off the hook with, I think you'd really enjoy this and you'd be really good at it. There's so much compliance in mortgage. That, you would have a field day with it. You could take the stuff about retail compliance. You could easily convert it to understanding federal law, state law, agency requirements, investor requirements. And that's what I did. I was ready for a change. And so we went and started up a branch of a mortgage broker office in Dallas, Texas. And that was pretty successful all the way up until about 2007.
I think that's a pretty, I would ask what happened, but I don't want to put you through that.
Yeah, it's a little trauma. We trauma bonded, some of us that have lived through that. Yeah, we would come into work every day and look at this thing called the uploadometer and find out, well, I was just about to sell, 20 loans to this particular entity, and they just imploded overnight. So I've got to go pull those files and close them somewhere else. And within a matter of months, we didn't have anywhere to sell loans to anymore. So that was the end of that. But it gave me an interesting opportunity. So whereas the person I went to work for actually exited the mortgage industry and decided to go on and do some other things, I was really enjoying it. So I decided I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to stay into it. So during that time, I went to go work for a few startup companies, startup lenders, broker that was on the verge of becoming a lender, getting their Eagle authority from FHA, et cetera. And I came in as their first compliance manager and helped them go through state audits. And there was a period of time of, when NMLS came around and you had to get everybody licensed or registered. And I went to go work for an entity who had lots of loan officers in lots of states. And most of them did not have to be licensed at the time, and now they did. So we had to get about 1,000 originators around the country
to go take a class.
To go take the class, do the background check, things I hadn't had to do before. And, as each state was coming up on their deadlines to get it done. So that was about a year of my life doing just that. And shortly thereafter, then there was this thing in reaction to 2007 called the Dodd-Frank Consumer Financial Reform Act. It's made a few changes in the industry. It's ripples in the pond. And I found myself spending a lot of time getting familiar with everything Dodd-Frank was
Mm-hmm.
establishing. It was essentially a 10-year path of here's all these rule changes that have to be made,
Mm-hmm.
and lenders are going to have to be able to implement all of these. And one of the things that, at the time I was working for one particular lender, and so I was thinking about, well, how am I going to solve this for my company where I worked?
Yeah.
And the answer was really, I can't do it by myself. I can't do it alone. I need my technology to actually be leading this initiative.
Yeah.
At the time, we were on an LOS that had been around in the market. Folks will know I went to go work for that company a little over 13 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
before they were acquired by ICE, back when it was Ellie Mae.
Mm-hmm.
And really my job when I started there was help the product and help the company prepare and implement all these reg changes that were coming. So we
Yeah.
had TRID, we had ATRQM, we had just come off LO Comp and RESPA
Mm-hmm.
2010. So that all these new rules were coming. I was fortunate enough to kind of be in some of the conversations because of participating with the MBA, the Mortgage Bankers
Yep.
Association. I had exposure and access to talk to the people that were at the new CFPB that were
Mm-hmm.
going to be charged with implementing all these rules.
Yeah.
And so, I was able to kind of get in and have some of these discussions and present not only well, here's what lenders are going to need, but here are the things technology is going to need in order to support those lenders.
Yeah.
And it gave me a unique perspective on implementing these rules because I was thinking about it both from a technology perspective and as a lender perspective, sort of at the same time.
Yeah.
If I'm going to
And
have to, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. No, I was going to say, you talked a lot about different changes like over your tenure in the industry, and like to kind of take that knowledge and look forward, right? How do people actually prepare for those changes, right? Because you've got the tech that you have to do with talking with regulators and all of that, but as we come into this, I know the NBA solved some problems on Monday night. The week we're recording this, it's January 30th is today's date.
Yep.
But the NBA came out that they helped make sure we had funding for FHA programs and all of that stuff. How do you see lenders preparing other than just being involved in the NBA?
I will say involvement's going to be key because unlike what we had with Dodd-Frank, which was a 10-year roadmap that said, here's what you need to do,
Mm-hmm.
that's all kind of been done now.
Yeah.
And so the things that you could anticipate and you knew you had to do have kind of given way more to this uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a betting man, and I like to occasionally, my guess is over the course of the next 4 years, we're probably not going to see a lot of regulation coming out of the federal level, whether it's political pressure, funding. I don't believe we're going to see too much activity as far as like a new regulation goes.
Yep.
That also means that some problems we have with existing regulations may not get addressed either. There are still some things in TRID that people would like to see addressed. There are still obviously a lot of issues with RESPA people would like to see addressed. So to your question, I'll say this, and I'm going to add one more thought before I go on. There is a sand trap, if you will, in the thinking that just because new regs aren't being made and maybe enforcement may not be as active as it's been for the last few years, it's what you're doing today that people are going to be looking back on more than 3 to 4 years from now. So what I call the sand trap is don't take your foot off the gas. Don't think that I can relax or I can take liberties, because eventually the pendulum swings the other way. And the examiners are going to look at, in the future, not just what you're doing in the future. How did you act during this period? Did you continue to put consumer issues first and foremost in front of your mind, and making sure that, things were fair and transparent to them? Or did you kind of take advantage of the chaos to say, well, maybe I can cut some corners in order to save some cost? That to me is the sand trap, is the danger. Because even though they're not going to get you today or tomorrow, that doesn't stop them from coming back 3 or 4 years from now and looking back at this time frame and saying, but look what you were doing then. And we saw that happen in the last 4 years from what was happening in the administration prior to what was happening.
There's history.
So there's history to this. It's not hard to figure out what happens. It will be interesting to follow what happens with some of the cases that are kind of open right now. Just before the change in administration, the Bureau filed some pretty big lawsuits against some pretty big entities. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with those here in the near future. Definitely keep an eye out on that. So with all that being said, it's an interesting time. Our volumes are still low. Industry is still struggling. On one hand, you want to take every opportunity, every loan you get, you want to be able to close. But you still have to be able to close them with quality and compliance so they can actually be profitable.
Absolutely.
You don't want indemnifications. You don't want repurchase demands. You don't want penalties or fines or, consumer refunds. So it becomes more important than ever that you maintain that level of quality and compliance with loans, even if your volume is not where it's historically been.
At Lodestar, we're big on celebrating things in our lives. Who or what is personally your Lodestar in your life?
This is going to sound funny and a little cliche, but the work I do helping lenders navigate the world of compliance is kind of how it's my reason to be. I actually do truly love it. And taking some of the complex problems that come across from day to day and saying, well, how could we solve this and do it in a way that is good for everybody, good for the lender, good for the investor, good for the consumer. And, there's just something very personally rewarding for me when you can take something super complicated, like in regulatory compliance, you often find, but just find a way to break it down into something simple and have it make sense to people and understand this is why we're doing it. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Now let's think about how we can be creative about implementing it in a way that, again, works for everybody. So I came from a company that said automate everything automatable, and I still believe in that concept, but I take it a step further and say automate everything automatable with quality and compliance front of mind.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, John, for joining me on Lending Leaders today. If people want to find you online, how's the best way to do that?
John@wilqo.com.
Perfect. John with an H.
There. John with an H, and just John at Wilqo.
I love that. Thank you again so much, John, for joining me. And thank you all so much for listening. And we'll see you all next week.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Great to be here.
My pleasure.